Headliner Nation, what's going on? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and it's time to talk about my start and sit matchups for tight ends here in Week 11. And Week 10 was awful. Not necessarily my accuracy. Like I said, always want to be over 70%. Let's take a look at it real quick, though. Only 65% last week. But here's the thing about the tight end position last week. In half PPR formats, which is what we base our scoring off of, only 3 tight ends scored 10 fantasy points last week. 2 of them were on the same team, Gronkowski and Brait. Gronkowski led the week last week with 12.1 points. My boy Hunter Henry, who for the first time all season long I finally listed as a set, hit 11 points, missed him. And then Cameron Brait missed him because he scored 10.6 points. This position is awful right now. It is an absolute disaster trying to figure out what you should do week in and week out. If you own a tight end that is named Travis Kelce or Darren Waller, you do not trade them for anything in the entire world. Don't do it, because they're the only 2 people who are actually consistent. Hold on to them. So let's jump into the matchup. We're going to kick it off with Thursday Night Football. Unfortunately, there's not really anybody to talk about on Thursday Night Football. Why is that? Well, because for the Arizona Cardinals, Dan Arnold still is not a thing. He keeps getting a few looks here and there, a few targets. He's not going to be hitting 10 points anytime soon. And Max Williams, who's back as well, he's more of a blocking tight end. So you're not going to see him catching too many passes. For Seattle, I would like to start one of these guys someday, and Greg Olsen would be the first man up. But as long as Greg Olsen, Will Dissly, and Jacob Hollister are all healthy, none of them are going to be a start because all 3 get equal amount of snaps. All 3 of them get targets. Greg Olsen is the only one that actually does anything on a weekly basis. But again, nothing to give you any hope of fantasy relevance. For Cincinnati and Washington, Drew Sample, he's going to be a sit. Again, at the start of the season, we thought, hey, maybe he would be a guy who could help us throughout the fantasy year. CJ Who's Your Mama did really well to begin with. Drew Sample comes into his spot after the injury, and he does really well, and then they've just completely forgotten about Drew Sample. He has 2 or fewer targets in 4 of his last 5 games. For Washington, though, we do have a guy who is getting a decent amount of targets. The performance, unfortunately, is just up and down. However, going up against Cincinnati, a team that allows the 2nd most fantasy points per game, we're going to play Logan Thomas this week. He is a start. Cincinnati, like I said, 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends. He has at least 4 targets in every single week every single game this season. And also, Alex Smith is the check down king. And you can see that in the performance right now. What did I mention? Like 29 targets over the last 2 games to J.D. McKissic. He's not really pushing the ball down the field, which helps Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas definitely a guy that can do some damage in the red zone, and he's a guy that's getting a decent amount of volume. The floor is always going to be really low, but he has a decent ceiling every week as well. For Atlanta and New Orleans, it appears that we have a couple of tight ends that we can start this week. First off, going with Hayden Hurst. New Orleans allows almost 15 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Hurst does have at least 7 targets in his last 3 games, and he is tied for 4th in receptions among tight ends now. So even though the season got off to a really slow start for Hayden Hurst, he's picked it up a little bit. And of course, we've got the injury to Calvin Ridley. He is yet to practice this week. If that happens, Hayden Hurst definitely a guy that 100% can help fill that void as that 2nd target in that offense. Like him this week going up against New Orleans. The ceiling isn't as high as a lot of people had hoped. There's a lot of Hayden Hurst truthers that felt that he would be a lot bigger of a ceiling so far this season. He just hasn't quite reached that, but he is, for as bad as the tight end position has been, he is pretty safe right now. So for New Orleans and Jared Cook going up against Atlanta, obviously Atlanta allows the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends right now. So Jared Cook, definitely a guy that we would like to start this week. And the one thing that I like about Jared Cook this week is his potential looks in the red zone. If you remember with Jameis Winston, who's going to be starting this week, yes, they're talking about Taysom Hill a little bit as well. You're going to see some Taysom Hill packages 100%. But with Jared Cook in the red zone, that was a place that Jameis Winston really liked to target his tight ends and Mike Evans while he was in Tampa Bay. If you remember, his connection with Cameron Brate was pretty strong, and then also O.J. Howard, when he was healthy and actually playing, he was the guy that was targeted quite a bit as well. So Jameis Winston could look towards Jared Cook because that's just some familiarity he has. That's something that he's comfortable with. So if Jameis Winston's on the field in the red zone, Jared Cook could see a decent amount of looks this week against Atlanta. For Pittsburgh and Jacksonville, Jacksonville hasn't had a relevant tight end all season long, and that's not changing this week. For Pittsburgh, though, we run into an issue with Eric Ebron because in the weeks that it looks like he's set up for success, he doesn't get any targets. And then in the weeks that it looks like he could have a tough matchup, the dude ends up scoring a touchdown. I mean, it's kind of backwards in terms of what we've seen with the statistics and what we've seen with the outcomes this season. For Eric Ebron this week, though, we're going to move him back to a sit. I mean, it is a good matchup for him, but he's always going to be touchdown dependent, and he's not reliable. Like I just said, I mean, last week was a smash position for him. He did nothing, and that's not necessarily his fault. You know, that's the way the game plan is. But it's 100% obvious that as of right now, you've got your 3 wide receivers there in Pittsburgh as your 3 top targets. You're running the ball with James Conner, and then if there's anything left over, it goes to Eric Ebron. Every once in a while, he's going to get a red zone look, or he's going to get a look that's going to help him score a touchdown. And as long as he's not getting the volume, he's not going to be hitting 10 fantasy points. So even if I list him as a sit and he scores a touchdown, if he doesn't get enough to get those extra 4 points, he's not going to end up being a start for us anyway. If you're in a desperate position, you could go with Eric Ebron. You just have to cross your fingers and hope. And unfortunately for me, even though I am a little I like to take some risks with my lineup. I like to try and throw some guys out there that look like they have a good matchup. I don't like risk that much with Eric Ebron. For New England and Houston, we don't have any tight ends that we're going to start in this matchup. Again, obviously with New England, we've talked about it all season long. Their tight ends aren't seeing any type of volume. They're not seeing any type of consistent workload there. For Houston, when Jordan Akins and Darren Fells are both healthy, you can't really trust either one of them. You start to trust them when one of them is out. Well, this week, neither of them seem to be headed towards being out, so we can't go with either of them. Last week seemed like a really good spot for both of them with the way the wind was in Cleveland. I thought for sure that we would see some targets go either of their directions since Watson wouldn't be able to push the ball down the field, and that just didn't happen. And with this matchup this week, there's nothing for me to really dive into that says we're going to see one of these guys be fantasy relevant this week. For Philadelphia and Cleveland, another matchup with 2 tight ends that we can start. Dallas Goedert is a start for me this week. Been, a disappointment since he has come back, but we're going to get back to that. Wentz is going to start targeting him. Hopefully this coaching staff gets their heads out of wherever and starts putting together a more successful game plan for Carson Wentz and the Eagles. For Dallas Goedert, though, he gets a Cleveland team that does allow over 14 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And then on the flip side of that, Austin Hooper is a reason why I'm not listing any starts for wide receivers this week in Cleveland, because Austin Hooper gets Philadelphia that allows the 4th most fantasy points per game. That's why I'm going with Austin Hooper this week, and that's why I'm going with Austin Hooper as my Manscaped must start this week. That's right. If you head over to manscaped.com, you can get any of their awesome products for 20% off and free shipping by using the code word Headliners, all capital letters. If you're needing a little help cleaning up, then you can go over to manscaped.com, and they've got a lot of great items that you can use to get yourself looking good. We'll just say that. Again, manscaped.com, code word Headliners, all capital letters, 20% off and free shipping on all of their great products. Yes, Austin Hooper, my Manscaped must start this week. Feeling good about Austin Hooper. Again, this is an offense that is probably going to start utilizing the tight end position a little bit more with no Odell Beckham Jr. We've seen it where they're running. You've got Nick Chubb, you've got Kareem Hunt, but they're going to have to pass. And the wide receivers just haven't had any type of a ceiling this week. So when you get into a matchup that is as good as Philadelphia and you've got Austin Hooper there, last week back, I had him listed as a start, didn't end up hitting. it was also his first week back after that injury, after that surgery. Another week back now. Hopefully he's feeling a little bit better, and this is a good enough matchup to take advantage of. For Detroit and Carolina, TJ Hockenson is the only guy to talk about here in this matchup. But last week, what we saw from TJ Hockenson is what has been a concern from him since the very beginning. He does have up and down performances. Last week, only 2 catches for 13 receptions. I'm giving him a bye last week, though, because he had that toe injury that popped up late in the week. Maybe that was an issue. Maybe that is why he didn't have a better day in a situation really where he should have had a much better week. But again, with that toe popping up later in the week, it does make it difficult to determine whether or not it was the toe, part of the game plan, or something like that. So we'll go back to TJ Hockenson this week. He will be a start against Carolina. Carolina can be a tough defense against tight ends. We've seen it before, though. If Kenny Golladay is out, TJ Hockenson is a guy that sees a lot more volume, and I'm not expecting Kenny Golladay back this week, so we'll roll with TJ Hockenson again. It seems like the only tight ends I'm starting this week come in matchups where they're playing each other. And here's another one, Tennessee and Baltimore. Jonnu Smith, got him listed as a start this week after listing him as a sit last week. Now, he did score that touchdown, but he didn't have enough volume on top of it to actually become a start. But I am going to list him as a start this week. And I mentioned it last week. They have to find a way to get him more involved in the game plan again. They did at the start of the season, and the offense was absolutely rolling. He's kind of disappeared over the last few weeks or been up and down, and all of a sudden that offense is starting to spit and sputter a little bit. So what can you do? And I think we saw that a little bit last week. He did have 6 targets again, which is great to see, and they got him that rushing touchdown. So that was also good to see from them because that was showing some creativity and getting Jonnu Smith involved in the game plan more. So hopefully this week they get him involved in the passing game a little bit more, not necessarily the running game, makes him a start again. And then for Mark Andrews, he finally saw some volume pushed his way again last week. A good week. He did end up scoring, so it wasn't that great of a week, but he was just below 10 fantasy points in half PPR. I think he scored like 9.7 or something like that, so pretty close to being a hit last week. Ended up missing it, though, because I did have him listed as a start, but we're going to go back to him again this week, because hopefully, again, like I've mentioned, they're getting him more involved. The same way Jonnu Smith was involved to begin with, they got to get him more involved. Mark Andrews was involved at the beginning of the year. He's become super inconsistent down the stretch. They got to get him more involved again. That's what you have to do with these guys that can dominate the tight end position. You have to keep them involved if you're going to win your football games. For the Jets and Chargers, Hunter Henry, listen, you let me down last week. You didn't, because you had a good game, and that's awesome, because I love you, Hunter. However, I listed you as a start for the first time, so I'm assuming, or a sit for the first time this season, so I'm assuming you were just out to punish me, and I don't appreciate that, okay? As a longtime supporter of you, don't really need to be punished. But anyway, we're going to get back to it. We're not going to list Hunter Henry as a sit this week. We're going to list him as a start going up against the Jets, because it's the Jets, they suck, and hopefully Hunter Henry doesn't suck this week. For Miami and Denver, if there's one person that accurately defines the tight end position, it's Mike Gesicki. You just never know what you're going to get, right? It could be the best matchup in the world. The dude has 1 catch for 2 yards. It could be the worst matchup in the world. The dude has 8 catches for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's just, that's the way it is with Mike Gesicki. So what you do if you own Mike Gesicki, you put him in your lineup, you hit submit, and you just cross your fingers and hope. On the flip side of that, you've got Noah Fant. Now, Noah Fant, I don't like the upside this week. Miami's pretty good against tight ends, so I'm not loving the upside, okay? He is seeing targets, though, and that's the one thing with the tight end position. If you own a guy that's seeing targets, you got to roll with them, because if they're seeing the targets, that's more opportunity for output, more opportunity to hit. Unfortunately, just not all of them are hitting right now. Not all of them are turning that opportunity into actual physical fantasy numbers. But again, that's just the way it is sometimes. If you've got the guy getting the targets, you've got to roll with them. Noah Fant is getting the targets. And even though I don't love the upside this week, we will still go ahead and roll with him. For Dallas and Minnesota, I am skipping over Dalton Schultz this week. I think we're going to see a better performance out of the wide receivers, and Dalton Schultz isn't really going to give us the type of upside that we would like to have in order to start him. For Minnesota, Irv Smith Jr. was a guy last week that I was seriously considering as a start, and then he ended up not playing. Kyle Rudolph saw some targets, but when you have both of those tight ends, it goes back to some of these other teams as well, like Houston with their tight ends, Seattle with their tight ends. If you've got guys splitting snaps and you've got guys splitting targets, there's just not enough volume to go around for those guys to be consistently producing on a weekly basis. And that's why I've also got these guys listed as sits again this week too. Green Bay and Indianapolis, and I've moved on from Robert Tonyan at this point, and I mentioned it last week that we were probably going to be done with him very soon because you've got Allen Lazard coming back. And even without Allen Lazard coming back, we've seen over the last couple of weeks that Robert Tonyan just isn't being targeted the way that he was a few weeks back. I mean, that would be great if he would be, but it's the same thing. Green Bay doesn't utilize tight ends. Aaron Rodgers doesn't look towards his tight ends. Maybe it's one play here or there, but that's about it for them. For Indianapolis, I really thought Trey Burton was going to be a guy that was going to step up on the Thursday Night Football matchup last week when we found out that Jack Mother-Doyle was going to be out. It didn't happen, though. Again, another team utilizing multiple tight ends at the position, giving them multiple targets a game. You just can't predict who's going to have a good game and who isn't. If you have Travis Kelce or Darren Waller, you put him in your lineup. Enough said. The Rams and Buccaneers definitely present a struggle for us on Monday Night Football. For the Rams, Tyler Higbee had a decent week last week. But keep in mind, it was only 3 catches. One of those was for 54 yards, and that's really what made up the majority of his week. Again, Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. When they're on the field together, there's no telling who is going to be the guy. It's not Tyler Higbee on any given week. It's not Gerald Everett on any given week. And it hasn't been Tyler Higbee in quite a few weeks. For Tampa Bay, Rob Gronkowski, we will go back to him again, and we just hope that he scores a touchdown. If he doesn't, he's not going to get 10 points. If he does, he's going to be really close. What we really need the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to stop doing is utilizing Cameron Brate. Can we just leave him on the bench, please? Tom Brady, can you stop looking his way? Give those targets to Gronkowski so we have another guy that we can rely on, please. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Tight ends start and sit for Week 11. Do me a favor if you appreciate that content. Hit the like button down below. As always, if you have a comment, leave it down in the comments below. Questions, whatever it may be. I'll try to get to as many as I can. And then, as always, if you're new to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that like button. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Everybody out there, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.